Hi everyone, we're back again today to talk more about multiphonics. This week we're going to talk about multiphonics that don't have the fundamental pitch in the resultant multiphonic sounds. So how this is achieved is by using a clarion fingering and produce the clarion note as well as the altissimo note that fingering is supposed to produce. These are labeled category C in the multiphonic fingering chart that is on my website if you want to refer to them. I have this one. I have this one pulled up right here that we will refer to a little bit later on. Well, actually, let's just do that right now. So these are all labeled C, and you can see that they have a clarion note as well as an altissimo note. Using a more or less standard clarion fingering. Not all of them do, but most of them use a standard clarion note fingering. Yeah, and some of them are labeled A, like this one here, just because depending on the actual multiphonic itself, it can be produced in a similar manner as the undertone multiphonics that we talked about a couple weeks ago. Overtone multiphonics that we talked about a couple weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, I believe. But yeah, these are clarion and altissimo notes. So an important thing to remember with clarion notes is that the clarion note is actually not the fundamental of that fingering. If you think back to our undertone multiphonics and our voicing exercises, we're able to produce a note that is in the Xiaoyumo register using a clarion fingering. So going back to my favorite example of C6, that is the note we associate with this fingering, because that is the note that is most easily produced with this fingering. But we're also able to produce an open G, well, a G4 with this fingering. And that is actually the fundamental of that fingering, not the C6. So the register key, most of the time, it's too small to act like an actual tone hole. So it just excites the third harmonic, and that's why we get a clarion note. But we can use our voicing to force that tone hole to act, that very small register key tone hole, to act as an actual tone hole, and that's how we get the fundamental. That is also another similarity between the undertone exercises and these multiphonics that we're talking about today, is that the lower you go in the clarion register, well, I guess it's the exact opposite of the undertone exercises. So the undertone exercises, the lower you go in the clarion register, the harder it is to produce that fundamental. And these type of multiphonics that we're talking about uses that to our advantage. So the lower you go in the clarion register, the easier it is to produce these multiphonics, because it's less likely that the fundamental note will sound and get in the way of the multiphonic. So yeah, that's how that kind of correlates in this situation. I won't go into too much acoustic stuff since we've talked about it in previous videos, but I'm happy to explain in more detail. If anyone wants to, just send me a message privately or something, get in touch with me. I'm happy to explain more. So getting on with the multiphonics, first of all, let's just pull this back up and just show you what they kind of sound like. Let's just pick this one here. So this is using the E fingering, and we're getting the F sharp above that as well. So here are the two notes by themselves. So you can hear with this particular one, it's much more easy. It's more it's much more difficult to play at a comfortable volume that we're used to. And now let's take the one right beside it, same fingering, but this time it's E and D flat or C sharp. So like with our, it's the same thing with our overtone multiphonics that we talked about a couple weeks ago, or actually any multiphonic. There are more than 2 pitches that can be produced with each fingering, and the bottom note is more or less what it is, because just the way how the instrument works, it's very difficult to get 2 notes to sound where the bottom note is not in the Xiaoyumo register or in the lower Clarion register. If I were to use, say, actually let's go back to the chart and I'll show you the highest it goes in my chart is using the G fingering, G6 fingering to get the G, and the E quarter flat above it, if yeah, that one. So that's the highest it goes in my chart, because it's possible to do even higher, but you can hear that the Clarion note, the Xiaoyumo note is gonna start getting in the way. I'm gonna do the A fingering and should be an F sharp above. It's a F quarter sharp. Okay, so I'm gonna get the F quarter sharp and the A, and you're gonna hear that the fundamental note is gonna start getting in the way of this multiphonic. So I'm not sure how well you can hear that. Hopefully you can hear it. But it is, while it is possible to get the F quarter sharp and the A, whatever that lower note, F is starting to come into play, and it's depending on how well you can voice it, it can be quite present. So it makes these multiphonics a lot harder when you start getting into the upper clarion using those short tube notes. But yeah, if you really tried, it is possible, but it's quite difficult to do consistently. I think just now I was able to stabilize it somewhat near the beginning, but I kind of lost it at the end, that, as you can hopefully hear, that the Xiaoyumo note started creeping in. So yeah, so how do we go about learning these multiphonic? As with all other multiphonics, you really have to know what your target note is. Less so for the bottom note, just because it's more or less the fingering, the note associated with that fingering. But the upper note, you really have to know which note you're targeting for. I like to use the example of the fork F sharp fingering sounding an F sharp and the E flat above. I don't know why, I just find that the easiest to teach with or demonstrate with, while not being overly difficult or overly easy. So anyways, so the fingering, fork F sharp, and we're playing an F sharp and the E flat above. So first step is you want to be able to slur between the 2 intended notes. So in this case, F sharp, E flat. Okay, so voicing exercises we've done, we kind of know most of the changes that happen physiologically is happening in our voicing with our tongue. So our tongue is changing in such a way that we're gonna get the F sharp and the E flat. Coming back down is a little more difficult just because the clarinet likes to stay in the highest excited register. It's the same reason why slurring down from the clarion down to the xiaoyumo is more difficult than slurring up. And when you start doing altissimo down to xiaoyumo, it's really difficult, and it's very susceptible to squeaking. It's the same reason. So learn how to slur between the two notes first. And if you want to think about your tongue on a sliding scale, this is the beginning of actually this one. Left side of the video, left side, left to right. This think of this as the starting position for your tongue on the lower note, and this is the ending position. So you're playing the lower note, and then you're playing the upper note. Lower note, upper note. Now, if you slow down your tongue motion and gradually change from this position to this one here, there's a sweet spot somewhere in here that will get both notes to sound. And once you figure out where that sweet spot is, you want to train your tongue to be able to stop in that position. And that's how we get these multiphonics to sound. Well, that's more or less how we get all of these multiphonics to sound, regardless of which type of multiphonic we're doing. But with these multiphonic, this is just the best way to explain it, and there's not a golden rule of which way your tongue is moving. So this is the best way to describe these multiphonics: is starting position, ending position of the two notes, and then you want to find that sweet spot in the middle where both notes can sound. So yeah, once you're able to kind of know where that sweet spot is, you can actually adjust it. Think of going back to the sliding scale. If the sweet spot is here, you can move your tongue a little toward the upper note voicing, and you'll be able to get the upper note to be more dominant than the lower note, and vice versa. If you change your voicing so that it's a little bit closer to the lower note voicing, that note will become more dominant in the sound. So it's quite flexible in terms of what you can do with these multiphonics. It's just very difficult to control. Of the 4 categories I have labeled in my fingering chart, this is the hardest one, just because if you look at the fingering chart, remember that the number represents difficulty. With category C, you only see one that is a difficulty of 2. Everything else is a 3 or 4. Even the ones that fall into this category but use the same production method as the overtone multiphonics, even those are not easy. So just keep in mind that these multiphonics are hard and will take a lot of work to get them to speak properly. And yeah. Oh yeah, there's also one special case I want to bring up. We brought it up last week as well. It's this one right here, the E flat and the G, using this Clarion F fingering plus the last ring and the EB key. This is not a closed dyad, at least not in the way I defined last week. This is actually a multiphonic that uses the second and third register of this fingering. It just so happened that the registers are very close together, and you're able to get this multiphonic. So with this fingering, here it is one more time, the fingering. The fundamental pitch is a D. So that's the fundamental pitch, and then one register up, that's the next register, and then the one above that, the G, is the third register, which is actually the easiest to play. Is that. So we're actually playing the second and third register of this fingering, and this is one of more or less difficult one. I believe this fingering is from the Jungle by Eric Mandat. I'm like 99% sure that's where this multiphonic came from. But yeah, this is a special case I want to bring up. Well, not special case, just one I want to draw to your attention that this is not a closed dyad. If you're looking at my chart, this is actually what we're talking about, where we're playing a second and third register note. I guess I shouldn't call it Clarion and Altissimo, but everything else is a Clarion and Altissimo. Just in this special case, there's two notes in the Clarion. So here's the multiphonic. Yeah, this is another one where the fundamental can get in the way. I believe in the Jungle itself, it actually goes by pretty quickly, so you don't actually sustain the multiphonic that much. And it's just one I want to bring to your attention if you're consulting my chart, and you might get confused. But yeah, like I said, these probably take the most practice to get of all the multiphonics, and once you're able to produce them consistently, they're quite flexible, and you can do a lot with them. I hope I've made everything clear. It's a kind of a shorter video, I believe. I felt pretty short actually. Anyways, but yeah, I hope you have some fun learning to play these multiphonics, and I'll see you next week.